Howdy folks, it's Bucket Fridge. I hope you're all doing very well today. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel. In today's video, we have the part 2 of our 3-part series on the in-depth PvE discussion for Destroyer. For those who are unaware of the series that I'm talking about, in the first part of the series, we go over the basic Destroyer 101, an introduction to the class, how the class mechanics work, and how everything functions. So if you're unfamiliar with those things, I would suggest watching that video first, and I'll put a card up, and we'll link that for you so you can understand how Destroyer works, because this will be the part 2, as I mentioned, which is the in-depth PvE discussion. So I suggest making sure that you're familiar with the class before watching this one. But for those of you who've already watched that video, I appreciate you all supporting the channel very much. I really do appreciate it. It means the world to me, and your guys' compliments in the comments were incredibly nice to read. So thank you all who have watched that first video, and thank you all to the new subscribers. And for those who are just tuning in for the first time to this channel, welcome one and all of you. So this video, as I mentioned, will be the in-depth discussion, and so this is for people who already have an understanding of Destroyer. And with that being said, why don't we hop right into the video? I'll just briefly touch on what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to have the in-depth discussion on engravings, how to get a 4x3 and a 5x3, and why we choose certain engravings over others. We're going to talk about tripods and each specific tripod for each specific skill and why we take those tripods. Then we're also going to get into cards, gems, and have an overall discussion about the balance changes and how that has affected Destroyer and what it's different now compared to previous versions. So buckle up, we are in for a long video. Let's get started. As you guys can see here, we are going to be on my NA account first to go over the engravings, as this is where I have more engravings than I do on my Korean account. But as well, I figured you guys don't want to have to read the engravings in Korean again, so let's hop into the engravings and why we're choosing the engravings that we're choosing. If you remember from the last video, if we were going for a 4x3, the 4 that I will be choosing for Destroyer first will be Supercharge, Grudge, Barricade, and then our class engraving, Hammer of Rage. So let's dive into each one of these abilities specifically, and then we'll touch on how to get a 5x3 and what ones I'll be using for that one as well, or the addition that we'll be adding on to our 4x3. Firstly, I believe that Supercharge is by far the most important engraving to have on your Destroyer. If you're going to have any other engraving after you get your Hammer of Rage, I would suggest Supercharge is the first one that you get. We have a lot of skills. 3 of our purple skills, as you'll see in the second part of this video where we go into the tripods, 3 of our abilities have a charge skill, and they're all of our purple abilities. And you'll notice that the charge skill is increased by 40%, which saves us an incredible amount of time, but it also increases the damage by 20%. And the reason that is significant is because the Supercharge is multiplicative. So we'll go into what the difference between multiplicative and what additive is for engravings such as Cursed Doll, which would be additive. Before we touch on the other engravings, I'll go over what the difference between multiplicative and additive means for your character. So for example, skills like Barricade, Master Brawler, and Grudge are all multiplicative, meaning that it will net you more damage, even if by a little amount, than additive engravings like Cursed Doll. So for example, Cursed Doll reads attack power plus 16%. So what that does is it takes a percentage of your total attack power and increases it by 16%. So just to use this for easy math for everybody, so let's say that we had 1,000 attack power. So with 1,000 attack power, it would take 16% of that, which would be 160, and just add it to your total attack power, leaving you at 1,160, which that is additive. But when you get into something like Barricade, where it increases damage done by 16% while shielded, that is multiplicative. It is increasing the total amount of damage you deal by 16%, whereas something like Cursed Doll is just adding attack power. Does that make sense for everybody? If it doesn't make sense, leave a comment down below and I will try to explain further for you the difference between multiplicative and additive. And I'll also put up a little definition for everybody so they can read the difference between the two. But like I said, if it doesn't make sense, leave a comment and I'll be happy to help further. While we're discussing Barricade, Barricade will also be one of the engravings that I choose in my 4x3. The reason we want to choose Barricade is essentially what this does is it gives us a 16% damage boost on all all of our purple abilities. You'll remember from the last video that whenever we use our 3 gravity cores, we get a shield for 30% of our max HP for 3 seconds. That essentially is enough time to get off your purple ability while you have your shield up, therefore increasing your purple abilities damage by another 16%. Let's go over Grudge next. Grudge, I'm sure everybody's very familiar with, but Grudge is one of the best engravings that you can have for any one of your classes, so I highly suggest making sure that you have this. Grudge is also another multiplicative engraving, and the nice thing about Grudge on Destroyer is that we are the second tankiest class in the game. I will post a little image of the classes ranked in order from tankiest to least tanky, and you'll see that Destroyer is second. Not only do we have a giant health pool and just high damage prevention built into our class with Endure Pain and getting max percentage HP shields, we also just have a very high armor coefficient that leaves us taking less damage than other classes. So Grudge is one of the other mandatory engravings that I believe is necessary on Destroyer to get our purple damage as high as we can on each one of our uses. Those are 3 of our non-class engravings that I would use for our 4x3. But for our 5x3, I will actually be adding Cursed Doll. Even though Cursed Doll is an additive engraving and Master Brawler is a multiplicative engraving, this will have 100% uptime and a penalty of the minus 25% healing, but similarly to Grudge, we won't really feel the pain from Cursed Doll. But Master Brawler is still an acceptable choice, but just be aware that you might not have 100% uptime on Master Brawler as it is only head attack damage. Granted, we do want to be hitting the head whenever possible, but for certain encounters that might be more difficult and not net as much DPS. I personally would be putting Master Brawler as a 1 or 2 depending on how many engravings we're able to get with our upcoming relic set. And since we're talking about the relic sets, let's hop into the 5x3 and how to get a 5x3. But before we go into the 5x3 and how to get a 5x3, let's go over our class skill in a little more detail. The critical strike chance is increased by 5% and critical damage is increased by 15% in proportion to the number of charges we use upon our use of purple abilities. So the reason this is really significant is because you'll know that we need to use 3 gravity cores whenever possible and never 2 or 1. Therefore, we are going to get a 15% increased crit chance as well as a 45% crit damage increase. You'll notice that with all our other multiplicative engravings, with Grudge, Barricade, Supercharge, and then additionally Cursed Doll for our 5x3, that we are trying to accomplish the biggest purple swings that we can. That's also one of the reasons that we want to be stacking specialization and crit, which we'll get into later in the video and understand why we want those ones as opposed to the other stats. But now that we have an idea of what we're going to use for both our 4x3 and 5x3, I'll briefly touch on how to get both. A 4x3, for those unaware of how to get that, is you need 2 rank 3 engravings at 9 nodes. As you can see, most of these are at 9 nodes, and then a stone you need to craft, which is 6/6. 9 plus 6 is 15, and you'll know that each one of the engravings to be at rank 3 needs 15. So that's 2 of our 4 engravings. The other 2 parts of the 4x3 come from our accessories. Usually we want to pick our class engraving and then our last non-class engraving for all of our accessories at +3/+3 when you are above 1370. So to recap, for a 4x3, you need rank 3 of 2 engravings as well as a 6/6 stone. And for the last 2, you want to be stacking 1 engraving with your class engraving on all 5 of your accessories. And that way you can accomplish a 4x3, a 5x3. So how do we get our 5x3? Our 5x3 will be accomplished when we have access to our relic gear. What we'll need to do is we'll need to have 1 of our engravings, preferably one of our non-class engravings first, something like Barricade, Grudge, Supercharge at legendary rank, so we get 12 nodes from that. And also we will be getting relic stones. And the nice thing about the relic stones is that it has 10 nodes in it, up from 9, giving us a better chance of getting a 7 out of 7 for our 2 engravings on the relic stone. So if you didn't catch that, we will need a 7/7 stone as well as 1 legendary ranked non-class engraving to accomplish a 5x3. So now that we understand how to get a 5x3, let's discuss which legendary engraving I will be getting to max. So I will probably be doing Supercharge as opposed to something like Grudge. While Grudge is more applicable because it covers almost every class, it is also the most expensive legendary engraving recipe that there is, at least on my server. So if you are not free to play, this is something that you could do if you're willing to spend that amount of money to get a legendary ranked Grudge. But as I don't have that kind of capital, as you can see, I will be going Supercharge, which is significantly cheaper, which is also still applicable on my Gun Lancer, so it is still something that I can use on multiple classes. All right, so let's recap all that we just learned. We just learned how to get a 4x3 and a 5x3, and the ones that I'll be going for the 4x3 again will be Supercharge, Grudge, Barricade, and our class engraving Hammer of Rage, and then adding Curse Doll for our 5x3, and then maybe a 1 or 2 of Master Brawler, depending on how many nodes we're able to get with our new gear coming out with Vaultin. So now that we have all that covered, let's hop over to my Korean account where we will go over the tripods, but you'll have to bear with me as we are going to be reading them in Korean, but I will provide the translation for you, so let's hop on over. All right, we're here on the Korean account. So one of the things that I need to preface before we get into the tripods and the skills is that it is impossible for me to know how many skill points each of you will have. So what I'll do instead is give you the optimal build if you were to have max skill points, but then tell you which ones I would put points into first if you do not have access to all the skill points, which I'm sure most of you don't. So take this and apply it how it works best for you, because I don't have access to your skill points and vice versa, but we will go over which ones to pick and why we pick them. So let's hop into it. All right, so for this section, what we'll do is we'll go over the different abilities and the specific tripods we take for each, as well as the rune that we want to use for each one of these tripods. We'll start with our blue abilities, our spend or builder abilities. Also, keep in mind that some of these translations might not be 100% accurate to what they will be when it releases in NAEU. So if the name changes a little bit, just go by where it is located inside of the tree. Also, if we're talking on our tripods, I mentioned that I would say which ones I would upgrade first if you had a limited number of skill points. I think by far the most important ones to upgrade first are our purple abilities. We want to make sure that we have 10 points in all of our purple abilities, as these will net us the most damage. And then I believe that Endure Pain is probably the next most important of your blue abilities, with all 3 of these kind of being of equal importance, and we'll get into why they're of equal importance, and it would just depend on what you're looking to do with the last of your points and how many of the points you have left. All right, let's go over Heavy Crush, our bread and butter ability. The first one we're going to take is called Instant Strike. This reduces the cast time by 0.3 seconds, and while that doesn't seem significant, it is actually quite significant because it allows us to be able to cast the ability quicker, hopefully chaining into more of our purple abilities and having a higher uptime on both. The second one that we have is Law of the Jungle, or Weak Meat as it translated to. I don't think that's correct, but this does 145% extra damage to non-boss minions. So for example, in Chaos Dungeons, this will actually do significantly more damage. Even though it does not affect bosses, it is still probably the best of the 3 tripods for this row. And lastly, we will be going with Wide Hit, which increases the radius by 30%. And 30% is pretty significant because, as you'll know, say with Perfect Swing, as we have to be a little bit a ways away to land the perfect swing, the extra 30% radius with our Heavy Crush will allow us to still be in range and not have to be right on top of the boss to use this ability correctly. While Aftershock is also a viable skill to take, this will just net you more damage, whereas Wide Hit will increase the amount of radius on the Heavy Crush, and this happens to be my preference and the preference of many. And then lastly, for the skill that we want to take the Recharge skill. This ability, as you guys I'm sure are aware, is going to allow us to potentially net more cooldown, allowing our other abilities to come up more quickly. So again, our rune that we're using here is Recharge. Next, let's go into Dreadnought, our counter ability. The first one we're going to take is Tenacity. Tenacity just provides a CC immunity while you are casting the skill. The reason that is significant is we don't want to get interrupted as we are trying to counter, as well as we can ignore some mechanics if we don't want to be CC'd and use this ability to prevent ourselves from getting CC'd. And the second one that we have is called Reinforced Blow. This increases the damage done by 30%. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Having 30% more damage on your counter, as well as just having an ability that has increased damage, will just help net us more damage. And we will be running Gale. Gale is the purple one, is the 12% increased casting speed on this, as it is a rather slow animation, helping us get this animation off faster and getting the proper counter and not missing the windows. All right, let's go into Jumping Smash next. Jumping Smash is our gap closer, and as you recall from the previous video, I mentioned I prefer Jumping Smash to Power Shoulder, and I'll get into the reasons why I prefer Jumping Smash, but we will still go over Power Shoulder as another option that you can use. But back to Jumping Smash. Jumping Smash, the first tripod that we want to take is our Leap. Our leap increases the distance by 4 meters, which is pretty significant, allowing us to either get out or get into combat from a greater distance and not having to use our spacebar ability. The next one is Armor Destruction. It is a 12% armor destruction for 14 seconds, allowing us to net more damage on all of our purple abilities. 12% armor destruction will just allow us to have more damage as the boss or whatever monster or person has less armor. And then lastly, we have our Pulverize. Our Pulverize will allow us to spin 3 times and increase the distance we travel by another 5 meters, as well as increasing the damage by 144%. That is a significant increase in damage, and I believe will net more damage overall than Power Shoulder, as you usually don't take 10 points in Power Shoulder and only go down to the second tier. But we also have Overwhelm, which adds another 30% stagger, as we are the stagger kings. So this helps making sure that we are able to get rid of that stagger bar whenever needed, and this is especially valuable in the upcoming Legion raids where stagger checks are mandatory. All right, let's briefly touch on Power Shoulder. Power Shoulder is another gap closer that we can use. In the first row, we want to be taking Sturdy Body as it translates to. I'm sure that it will be something a little different. This just decreases the amount of damage you take by 30% when using this ability, which is very handy. This one is Leap, increasing the distance you travel by an additional 3 meters. And usually these are the only 2 taken. It doesn't go down to this last tree here. So if you are short on skill points, you can use the Power Shoulder as opposed to using the Jumping Smash. And the rune that you want to use is the Rage, which gives you a chance to increase your attack speed by 16% whenever you use this ability. Also, let's touch on Power Strike very quickly, is if we don't need to take our Dreadnought for a counter, Power Strike is the ability that you would take in its place. So the first tripod that we take is Quick Move. At rank 5, this will have an extra 18% increased attack speed. So whenever you use this ability, you will get extra attack speed, as well as the second tripod is another Armor Destruction. So this is another very useful skill if you're not using Dreadnought to counter, and you can either run Gale with that or Overwhelm depending on what you need for each specific fight, whether you want to attack faster and get that animation over with, or whether you want to have a little bit more stagger damage for those stagger checks that we mentioned earlier. All right, for the last of our blue abilities, let's go over Endure Pain. Endure Pain, we will be taking Wide Hit to begin with, which increases the radius of our Endure Pain by 25%. Again, very similar to the Wide Hit in Heavy Crush. This will just increase the radius of our Endure Pain, allowing us to hit this from farther away whenever need be. You can also take this ability over here, which allows you to generate a gravity core even if you miss your skill. So either are viable. I prefer to take Wide Hit most of the time, as you really do want to hit this skill, especially because we want to use our newfound taunt that we got in the second row here. Provocation taunts the boss to us for 3 seconds, allowing us to get head attack damage on demand. So it is very important that you land this, and this makes it easier to land so that we can get our taunt. The last one that we will take is called Healthy Mind. This increases the duration of Endure Pain, the 40% damage reduction, as well as the CC immunity by 5 extra seconds when at rank 5. The other one here, which is also viable if need be, is a 90% damage reduction. This is a viable option, but primarily we want to be just increasing the duration of the damage reduction as opposed to having a higher damage reduction for a shorter period of time. This gets a little bit different in PvP, where the extra damage is always useful, but for PvE you usually want to go with Healthy Mind. And for the rune, we want to take reduced MP consumption. This just reduces the amount of MP that it costs to cast by 40%. Pretty straightforward and pretty simple, because we want to be using this whenever possible, especially when we're using our perfect swings, as we mentioned in the previous video. All right, let's go over our purple abilities. The first purple ability we're going to go over is Earth Eater, but there is something that I want to preface before we get into Earth Eater. In the previous video, in the Destroyer 101, I did not take Earth's Fury, as this adds an extra charged ability to your rotation. For Destroyer players who are just learning the class, this might feel a little clunky, especially if they don't have Supercharge. So in the 101 video, we opted not to take this, but since this is the in-depth PvE discussion, we wanted to include this ability, as this will net you the most damage, and it is something that will go along with Supercharge very well. So let's just demonstrate that really quickly on the boss. First thing we'll do is we'll generate some gravity cores. It's just for simplicity's sake, do some Endure Pain, and then we use our Earth Eater. And then we have a big overhead slam from Earth's Fury, allowing us to do more damage from our Supercharge as well. So again, we didn't take that in the 101 guide, but in this guide, because we are focusing on endgame PvE content, we will be taking Earth's Fury as the last row, adding a charged ability to it. All right, with that out of the way, let's go over the specific tripods in Earth Eater. The first one we're going to take is the Enhanced Attack. This is a 40% damage increase at level 1 and a 70% damage increase at level 5. More damage is always good, and remember that we are taking Supercharge, which is a multiplicative one whenever we're using charged abilities, so adding additional damage on top will help increase the top end damage. Next, we're going to go with Tenacity, making us uninterruptible during our casting, so this is very important as we don't want to get knocked out of this ability. And lastly, we are taking Earth Fury. It turns it into a charged ability. It will net us a significant increase in damage. It has an increased charge bar, so there is one more increased, but it decreases the bar charge up time, as well as adding additional damage. So this is a very, very high damage skill as one of our purple skills, and for simplicity, we want to add Gale, making it a quicker cast timer, so we have more uptime on all of our abilities, allowing us to have less time casting and more time doing damage. All right, let's go into Full Swing next. The first tripod we want to take is Quick Movement. Quick Movement will increase our attack speed by 10% at level 1 and by 18% at level 2. Excuse me, level 5. The next one that we're going to take is Scary Hammer. I don't think it'll be called Scary Hammer, but it is a funny name nonetheless. What this ability does is that per swing, you generate an additional 10% damage, maxing out at 60% damage. I'll explain what that means in just a second after we go over this last one. What this last one does for us, it is called Overwhelm. And what Overwhelm does is it adds an extra spin as well as increasing the top end damage. And as you remember, we want to be trying to hit these abilities for the most damage possible. So let's demonstrate that very quickly. So with Full Swing, you'll notice that we swing into the boss and we have 7 rotations as opposed to 6, and you'll notice that each subsequent rotation the damage goes up. So that is what that Scary Hammer and Overwhelm does, is it allows us to have each swing of Overwhelm do more damage. And for the rune, we want to be going with Overwhelm, another 30% stagger, as there will be more stagger checks in Legion raids that will wipe the raid if you do not meet those stagger checks. So again, this is Full Swing. All right, let's go over Seismic Hammer next. The first ability we want to take on our tripod is Quick Prep. Quick Prep just reduces the cooldown by 6 seconds at rank 1 and 11 seconds at rank 5. More Seismic Hammers, more damage. Pretty simple. The next one we want to go over is Juggernaut. Juggernaut increases damage done by 70% at rank 5 when 3 gravity cores are expended. As we are always trying to spend 3 gravity cores, this is a no-brainer for just extra damage. And lastly, we're going into Thirst for Power. Thirst for Power changes the seismic hammer from a line to an AoE and increases the damage done. I will show you what I mean by that. But with that ability taken, it turns into the spikes, as you'll see here, and a AoE around you, making the ability a little easier to land, as well as having 2 parts that connect from the initial impact damage with the spike damage as well. And then lastly, for Seismic Hammer, we want to take Gale to increase the casting speed, allowing us to get out of the animation quicker and allow us to have more damage and more uptime on our abilities, as we are running Gale on all of our purple abilities except for one. All right, we saved the best for last. So we are going to go over Perfect Swing next. Perfect Swing has one of the better tripods that we can take in weak point detection for our first row. This increases damage done by 45% at rank 5 and by 20% at rank 1 to push immune foes, which usually just roughly translates to more damage to bosses. The next one we want to take is Juggernaut. If you'll remember from Seismic Hammer, the Juggernaut allows us to do more damage by 60% at rank 5 and by 30% at rank 1 whenever we use 3 gravity cores. And as we're always going to be using 3 gravity cores, this is another top end damage increase. And lastly, we are going to go into Uncontrollable. Uncontrollable adds an extra cast bar but decreases the charge time by 50% and adds an extra 175% damage at rank 5. And lastly, for our rune, we're going to be taking Gale as well, increasing our cast speed to try to get that done as quickly as possible. As Perfect Swing has quite the charge up time, this will allow us to be able to land our Perfect Swing more effectively as we decrease the cast time. All right, next we want to go into what tripods to save for your armor to make sure that you have the correct ranks up to rank 3. All right, let's start with our blue abilities. For Heavy Crush, we're just going to take the Law of the Jungle or whatever it will translate to in NA. And then if you choose to run Aftershock with your Heavy Crush, you can select that as well. Next, for Dreadnought, we will just be going with our Enhanced Hammer, increasing the damage. Unfortunately, Tenacity or Arm Destruction do not have them, and we usually don't go down to rank 3, so we don't need to select any there. Next, for Power Strike, in case we don't need to use Dreadnought, we're just going to go with Quick Movement, which will just help increase our attack speed for Power Strike. Next, for Jumping Smash, we want to take the Leap, as we want to be able to have increased distance, as well as Pulverize to help increase the distance further, as well as increased damage. And for the last of our blue abilities, we have Endure Pain. Unfortunately, both Wide Hit and Provocation do not have tripods that we can select for the armor, but Healthy Mind does, allowing us to have a longer duration. All right, and then lastly, let's go into our purple abilities. So for Earth Eater, we are just taking our enhanced attack, which helps increase damage, and Tenacity does not have one, and then we will take one for Earth's Fury, which will help add more damage and decrease cast time. For our Full Swing, we can go the Quick Movement, which helps increase our attack speed. The Scary Hammer, as I don't think that will be the translation, will help increase the damage for this one, as well as for our Eye of the Beast, which will help further increase damage with that ability. Next, we'll go to Seismic Hammer. We're going to take the Quick Prep for lower cooldown, going to take the Juggernaut for increased damage, and for the Thirst for Power to further increase damage. And then lastly, best for last, Perfect Swing, we're going to take the Weak Point Detection for additional damage to bosses. We're going to take Juggernaut for increased damage when using 3 cores, and then we're going to take Uncontrollable for increased damage as well. So that covers the different tripods that you need to select for your armor when you get to tier 3. All right, let's hop into gems next. Gems are pretty straightforward. We're going to have our 4 damage gems, all for our purple abilities for Earth Eater, Seismic Hammer, Full Swing, and Perfect Swing. And then for our cooldown gems, we want to run all 4 of our purple abilities. So again, Seismic Hammer, Full Swing, Perfect Swing, and Earth Eater, as well as running one for Endure Pain, for Dreadnought, and for Jumping Smash. Let's go over our cards that we can use on a Destroyer. Unfortunately, the cards are not too much different from any other DPS out there. The budget card set allowing us to take reduced dark damage, which comes in play when we actually are fighting against Vaulted and the other Legion raid bosses. So that actually helps us take reduced damage in those fights, as well as getting the 12-piece awakening, meaning upgrading enough of the cards to have those little nodes, as you'll see there. Little nodes are what the awakening is. So once you have enough of 12 of those little nodes, you will get an additional 7% crit rate. 7% crit rate is great, as we are a class that wants to stack crit. And then for the optimal damage set, I'm sure of which all you have seen before, this is something that will take a long time to put together. So don't worry about having this optimal set. It is something that will take months and months and months. So don't worry about it. But just to show you guys the optimal damage set, this is optimal for actually every DPS in the game. We are going to take the Light of Salvation set, again, having reduced dark damage. But the significant thing here is the 12-piece, 18-piece, and 30-piece actually will change our damage type to holy, and then you'll see here on the 18 and 30 piece that it increases the holy damage by 15% here, allowing us to do more damage. And lastly, we will go over our combat traits. As you can see, we definitely want to be stacking crit. Crit is one of our primary stats that we need the most of, because we want to be critting whenever possible to increase the damage that we get on any one of our purple abilities. You'll see here that they go an equal amount of specialization with swiftness, but for starting out, I believe just going crit specialization will be better until we get enough gear to where we can distribute these evenly. The reason specialization is important for Destroyer is because this will help us do more damage on our purple abilities. This helps with our generation of our identity skill bar as well, allowing us to use that fairly frequently when we have a decent amount of specialization, and also helps increase the damage for our identity skill as well. So specialization and crit are the 2 stats that you will want to go first on your Destroyer, maybe eventually getting into specialization and swiftness equally, but for the time being, I will be going crit and specialization in an even distribution. Alrighty, that covers all of the topics except for our last one, which we'll get into. I wanted to kind of talk about how the balance changes affected the Destroyer. If you guys weren't aware, in Korea there was a recent balance patch, and we figured out from the announcement that we will be getting the updated version of Destroyer, as I suspected as much. I don't think that they would ever want to release the previous versions of Destroyer while they have the new versions in Korea, and have us have to go through the same growing pains that they did in Korea with Destroyer. With that being said, the biggest thing that happened with Destroyer is consistency was added. In the previous version of Destroyer, a lot of the tripods that you took were abilities called Lucky Core. Lucky Core was a increased percentage chance to gain an additional core whenever you use the specific abilities with that tripod. What they did is they removed those abilities and added the quick movement tripod, which helped increase attack speed, and then also increase the amount of gravity cores that any one ability did, allowing us to have a more consistent rotation and not having to gamble or guess when we would try to get more than 1 to 2 cores on any one of our abilities. So having Lucky Core removed and actually adding more core generation helped smooth out the class tremendously. It didn't add a significant amount of damage to the class, but what it did is it added a more consistent damage. That is a very crucial thing, is now that it takes out all the guesswork and allows you to have smoother and more consistent gameplay. If you guys are curious about the changes that happened on the Korean server, I actually have a video that I will put up a card for you guys, where I go over some of the balance changes, so make sure to check that one out as well. I also wanted to touch on maybe a little bit more advanced topics for Destroyer and PvE. One of the other important things to touch on is taunt and how useful taunt actually is in gameplay. So for those of you who don't play Gunlancer but want to play Destroyer, taunt actually is something that you can use to interrupt skills on a boss. So for example, if a boss is casting an ability, say Nakrasena, and the lightning that splashes all around you, you can actually taunt the boss during that animation and it will actually interrupt that skill, saving your party some damage. Or one of the things that you can do as well is whenever you use your taunt ability, if they were just about to do a counterable ability, meaning they turned blue and you had the window to counter, if you taunt and then counter, it will still count the counter from the mob turning blue, except you interrupted it and used your counter skill. So it's almost like getting to land a free counter, which is significant because it allows you to continue to hit the head and allowing us to have more increased damage. Majority of our skills have head attack damage, meaning we get increased damage when we hit the head of the mob. Hopefully we'll get the quality of life change here pretty soon where we can see whether the back and the front of the boss are, but taunt is something that you should utilize and not be scared to do because the boss will attack you. You are Destroyer, you are tanky, and you have a lot of shielding and armor to help sustain you through those attacks, especially with Endure Pain, and especially being able to do it on demand, especially for Perfect Swing, to land that big dam and see those big numbers pop up. But as far as more of the in-depth PvE discussion goes, I think that'll wrap up everything that I have for you guys today. I hope you all enjoyed the part 2 of our 3-part series on the in-depth PvE discussion. If you guys want to have more of a theory crafting discussion, please feel free to leave me a comment down below. I love talking theory crafting. I love talking min-maxing and the ways to improve our characters. So please leave a comment down below. If you have different suggestions or things that you might do differently, I would love to hear about them and would love to hear your guys' takes, and we can talk theory crafting. But again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you guys will subscribe and stay tuned for part 3 of this series, which is an in-depth PvP discussion. I know there aren't as many PvPers out there, but for those of you who are thinking about PvPing as Destroyer, I can tell you it is so much fun. What I'll do though for part 3 is in Korea, unfortunately, I get some pretty lousy ping a lot of the time, which makes PvP close to impossible sometimes. So what I'll do is I'll wait for Destroyer to come out in the next 8 days or so, and then I will make the PvP guide in NA so I don't have to experience the latency and show you guys how you can go bonk some nerds around in PvP. And if you want to climb to say Grandmaster, Destroyer would be a wonderful class to do so on. But as I said, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for hanging out and watching this video. I hope it was educational for you. I really do appreciate everybody's continued support, and thank you again to all the new subscribers. I couldn't do this without you guys, so thank you so much. Again, please subscribe to stay tuned for part 3, as well as coming and checking out the Twitch link down below, as I will be streaming next week, and especially for Destroyer coming out next Thursday. So make sure to come hang out on Thursday and we can play our Destroyers together, talk theory crafting, as well as just having a fun time with the new class. And hopefully we can build some sense of community and we can be the Destroyer boys together and learn from each other and continue to improve. Thank you so much everybody for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Make sure to be kind, stay safe, and I will catch you all in part 3.